Welcome, everyone, to day 3 of the Climate Service Providers Academy. Today, we're doing the climate data and information for the Midwest region. And as people are beginning to show up, we'll start giving some overview information. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jim Fox. I'm a Senior Resilience Associate with Fernleaf. We are located in Asheville, North Carolina, the ancestral home of the Cherokee and Catawba. I also lead the private sector member-led interest group for ASAP. Well, what are we doing today? We're really doing 3 things. We're really learning a lot about the network of the federal and state climate providers at 2 groups that represent the Great Lakes and Midwestern states. And hopefully then you'll be able to identify where you can find some of the best available climate information and decision support tools related to that to be able to do adaptation resilience work. And then obviously to build on a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in the previous 2 sessions, this will really deepen your understanding of how and why collaboration and engagement with this network of people, not only the people that are leading the session, but your fellow attendees, is really important. It takes all of us to be able to provide those critical services that our society and nation need at a very local level. This is what we're going to be doing today. After we go through this very brief introduction, we're going to go to a breakout room activity so that you can get to know some of the rest of the people in the room. We'll have an overview of GLESA and MCAP, and then do a little bit of questions and reflections about, okay, how's that looking to you? We're going to take a short break in the middle of the session, come back for 2 great case study presentations, have a peer learning discussion. Well, how does this apply to me? How can I apply this day to day? And then wrapping it up and ending by 3 o'clock. I'd like to introduce your 2 session leads today, and you probably had the opportunity to get to know both of them previously, but just as a quick introduction, Jenna is the co-director for GLESA, and she's based in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. In this role, she works with academics, practitioners, and communities to advance equitable climate resilience in this whole Great Lakes region. As a climate scientist by training, she enjoys helping GLESA's partners develop and apply the best available climate science in their decision-making. She has a PhD in geosciences from Princeton University and a BS in biochemistry from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Sorry, it took me a while to get that out. I know you're really going to get a lot from Jenna. I participated in 2 previous climate academies that she helped lead, and we learned a lot about how to do some of this work, especially in that area. Amanda Ferris is the Associate Director for the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is MCAP. And in this role, she collaborates with regional partners, translates climate data and information to support decision-making, and builds networks of climate adaptation practitioners. A key component of Amanda's work is bridging the gap between climate science and stakeholder communities through network building. She served as lead organizer for the Midwest Climate Resilience Conference. In the past has organized the Carolinas Climate Resilience Conference and is a member of the program committee for the National Adaptation Forum. I enjoyed working with and networking with Amanda for years here in North Carolina. We were sorry to lose her to Minnesota, but she's just doing fantastic work there as well, too. So great to see you in that role, Amanda. So we're going to go to a breakout room activity, and just checking the time. Oh, this is excellent. We actually have 10 minutes. So we're going to give you a full 10 minutes. There's going to be 3 people per group. And as the people are doing their magic in the background to get you ready to go to those breakout rooms, this is really what you're going to be looking at. So you're going to have about 3 minutes apiece. Start by doing your name with your introduction, as we usually do in ASAP activities. Talk about what your organization and role. And then really that focuses on kind of, well, what work do you do? And what is your past experience with some of those regional climate services? And that should help set the scene for a lot of our discussion today here as well, too. And what I found useful in attending this Climate Academy in the past is really getting to know the fellow professionals that are in
All
the
right,
room
breakout rooms
and then being
are
able to do
open.
business
You
with them
should
going into the
receive a
future.
prompt to
So with
navigate to
that,
your breakout room. If
I
anyone
will let
has any issues
the
getting there, just let me
magicians
know
send us
and
off
I
to
can
the breakout
assist you.
rooms. All right. Well, I hope you all had as great of conversation as we had in our breakout room. And in the interest of staying on schedule, I am going to turn it over in just a second to Jenna. The part of this segment, for those of you that joined us late, is to really give you the opportunity to see what both GLESA and MCAP are all about and what they can provide to you for the climate services and things as well too. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jenna, and you just kind of keep telling me when to advance the slides.
Great. You can go ahead and move the first one. Thank you so much, Jim. So GLESA has been NOAA's CAP-RISA team for the Great Lakes since 2010, and I'm really pleased to be able to share some of our work with you today. So we're housed at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, and the funded partners on our team include Michigan State, who leads our agriculture work, the University of Wisconsin, who leads our modeling work, and the College of Menominee Nation, who leads our tribal work. Next slide. So here we see the photos of many of the lovely folks that I get to work with every day. And we're a mix of social and physical scientists, a mix of faculty, staff, and students at the 4 partner institutions I just mentioned, including practitioners in residence and an external evaluator. Next slide. So it's important to mention that CAP-RISAs are only one type of federally funded climate service provider working in the Midwest or Great Lakes, kind of whatever the region means to you. And each of our programs has a slightly different mission or focus, but we often work together and refer partners to each other. So the CAP-RISAs are funded by NOAA, and we build sustainable relationships between decision makers and researchers to support collaborative and equitable adaptation to climate risks. NOAA also funds the Regional Climate Centers, or RCCs, and these groups support the operational production and delivery of climate data, and the Midwest RCC is housed at Purdue. The Department of Interior supports the Climate Adaptation Science Centers, or CASCs, and they really focus on fish, wildlife, and habitats in climate change. And the Midwest CASC is housed at the University of Minnesota. The climate hubs through the Department of Agriculture are really focused on agriculture and natural resource managers. And the Midwest Climate Hub is based at Iowa State. And also joining us today are our partners at a state-supported program in our region, the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, and Amanda will get to tell you more about their work next. I also want to mention that NOAA very recently announced a brand new CAP-RISA team serving the Central Midwest out of the University of Iowa. They just got started last month and serve Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas. So we're really happy to have a new neighbor in the CAP-RISA network. Next slide. So GLESA formally serves the Great Lakes watershed. That's the area shown in kind of the white squiggly outline. But in practice, we serve the area in blue, so any state that borders the Great Lake and Ontario. Next slide. So ultimately, GLESA's goal is for decision makers and communities to increase their capacity to adapt to climate change. We know communities in our region are already struggling with climate impacts, and many don't have the capacity to respond to what they're seeing now, not to mention planning for what's coming. And our team at GLESA is here to help communities build that capacity to adapt. And we do that through what we call the boundary chain model for stakeholder engagement. And that's the graphic shown here at the top. And that's social science speak for finding the right partners that already have the trust of the decision makers and communities we hope to work in. So then we don't have to start from scratch. So in practice, this looks like finding and engaging with these boundary organizations early and often during projects. So when you're writing a proposal and designing research questions, and every resource and tool I'll present today was developed with users with that framework. One way we do that is through a small grants program. We're granting a portion of our NOAA funding to local organizations. We finished 34 of those projects already, and we'll start 10 more next year. And we continue to evaluate how that process is working and make adjustments over time. Next slide. So day to day, our team works in 4 main areas. And for the rest of the time I have with you today, I'm mostly choosing breadth over depth. I'm going to briefly cover a lot of things that we do, pausing to spend time on a couple particular resources. I'm going to skip number 3, but would be happy to answer questions on facilitation. I'm hoping some of these topics pique your interest, and we can talk more in the one-on-one meeting opportunities, how GLISA can help you and your partners do your work better and easier. So next slide. So I'll start with 1. So a lot of what GLISA does is translating existing climate information and customizing it or localizing it for our partners. So here we see a 2-page summary of trends and impacts to key sectors in the Great Lakes with some trends shown in arrows. And we have a recorded Climate 101 presentation on our website. We give these live remotely all the time, or we can do them in person with some notice when we can customize the content for specific locations or sectors. Next slide. And we have an interactive climatology map on our website where you can select and view summary climate data for whatever location you choose. Here I'm showing an example for Duluth, where in the map on the left, you can either pick a station with the red dot or a climate division, the areas outlined in blue. And then you can view or print localized map, tables, and pre-written narrative text for more than 240 stations and dozens of divisions. And we also have climatologies for each of the 5 lakes with lake-based variables too. Next slide. Moving on to number 2, we develop, implement, and evaluate resources and tools to inform decision-making. So for each of these 4 tools, we have a page on our website where you can learn more. I think the link to those pages are going in the chat right now. You can look at a 2-page fact sheet or watch a short video to learn more. Teal Harrison with Adaptation International is going to cover the first of Floodwise communities in her presentation. And then I don't have time to cover all of these. Pivot, which is last, is kind of a newer area for us to work in potential climate in-migration to the Great Lakes region. Will people move here as a climate haven? And if so, how can we help communities prepare for those kind of different outcome scenarios? But I will spend a couple of minutes on scenario planning and CHAMP. Next slide. So scenario planning is a method to describe and incorporate uncertainty into decision-making. It's a framework to consider several novel situations and possible futures, not what's expected based on the past. So GLISA has developed our brand of scenario planning, which is adapted from our work with the National Park Service. So we work with practitioners to develop a set of physically plausible climate, weather, or lake level scenarios that form the basis of scenario planning exercises that we implement in a workshop setting. So before the workshop, there are several months of remote engagement where we learn from the practitioners key management concerns, goals, and vulnerabilities, and then we use those to tailor a suite of climate scenarios. And we do that using climate model projections, historic observations, and input from practitioners. We then present those scenarios in a workshop and facilitate breakout activities to customize and build on those scenarios, discuss impacts, and outline recommendations. And we're always evolving our approach, learning from each experience as we get feedback. Next slide. So most of the time we customize scenarios for each individual project and partner, but we do have some pre-developed scenarios on our website that can give you an idea of what they look like. So each scenario has a main narrative followed by a description of optional customizations. So for example, you could take this summer scenario for an extreme heat event and convective storms leading to power outages and then build it out for your location. You can add customizations like defining temperature thresholds for extreme heat, adding public health impacts that you know your community faces, or adding in local storm surge and erosion data if you're a coastal community. Next slide. So we have a scenario planning workbook that accompanies the scenarios, and it walks through the entire process from pre-workshop steps to actual exercises for breakout groups. But most of the time we partner with folks and we kind of do this for you. We implement the approach and facilitate the workshop. Next slide. So we've done scenario planning with a lot of different partners, the Intertribal Council of Michigan, the Michigan Army National Guard, the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, to name a few. And most recently, we've done lake level scenario planning twice. And here I'd like to highlight one case study, a lake level scenario planning exercise in Wayne County, New York. So this work was motivated by major flooding to the Lake Ontario coastline in 2017 and 2019. And it was part of a larger project looking at future economic risk to lake level flooding. And we focused the scenario planning on infrastructure and septic systems. So here we see a photo of the workshop and a summary of the recommendations that came out of the exercises. And what's exciting is that this was only a year and a half ago, and all the recommendations have been achieved to some extent in Wayne County. Through surveys and interviews from participants, we've learned that this approach can be an effective tool to get communities motivated and organized in their resilience planning. And notably, the process of working through scenarios with people from different departments, sectors, or institutions that don't usually interact regularly really makes a difference how much the folks need to coordinate on resilience and long-term planning. Next slide. So moving on to the second tool that I'll highlight, CHAMP is the Climate Hazard and Mitigation Planning tool, and this is relatively new. We developed it with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and a couple of partner CAPRISA teams in other regions. And it's really intended to help communities or counties access climate information in one place to develop hazard mitigation plans for FEMA. So users can pick their own locations and toggle between different climate variables and hazards for past observations or future projections, and you can set the time scale that you're interested in. A key feature is that once you've done all those things, CHAMP spits out customized narrative text that can be copied and pasted directly into hazard mitigation plans. So a couple of sentences that are customized for trends in your location. So the first version of CHAMP is publicly available, and we're looking for partners who want to use it and give us feedback. And we can help you use CHAMP either in your work or with communities that you work with. Next slide. So I will end with number 4, investigating emerging climate issues in the Great Lakes region. So GLESA does a lot of research, social and physical science research, but I want to wrap up by mentioning the unique data and modeling challenges that our region faces and how GLESA addresses those. So the lakes themselves, I think, are a great unifier and symbol for our region, but they make climate modeling really difficult sometimes. And that's because the lakes themselves affect our regional climate and weather patterns, so-called lake effects. And scientists are working to better understand these lake-land atmosphere interactions, but many global and regional climate models don't actually simulate the lakes or the lake effects themselves. So the data sets and products based on models that don't represent the lakes means they might not be reliable for our region. Next slide. So to address this, GLESA performs an ongoing evaluation of regional climate models to determine which ones represent the best information for our region. We're in year 8 of that process, what we call the Great Lakes Ensemble Project, to track progress made in regional climate modeling by evaluating the representation of lakes and climate model biases. We also assess data processing techniques like downscaling and bias correction and develop guidance for practitioners when they use climate projections in our work. Next slide. So I'll end with 2 examples of what that guidance looks like. So on the left, we have our practitioner's guide for climate model scenarios. And this is for people wanting to use future climate information in their work, but not knowing kind of what goes into choosing a model. So here we introduce climate model scenarios, how those are driven forward in time, and summarize the differences between scenarios to help folks make model choices. We've also developed a suite of consumer reports style guidance documents, things like buyer's guide and what look like menus for how to know what different climate models include We call those our climate model report cards for the individual models we've evaluated. So last slide, I know that I covered a lot that was kind of a rapid fire Glisa introduction, but I hope many of you consider signing up for the one-on-ones or reaching out outside the Academy to find time to talk. I think the take-home message for me today is really an invitation to partner. And while much of what I shared is publicly available, in practice, we almost always engage directly with partners using our tools and resources. I think I went a bit over, so I appreciate everyone's patience, and I will turn it back over to Jim to give it to Amanda.
Amanda,
Jim,
you go for it. Go right ahead.
Great. Sorry, I didn't know what kind of transition we were doing. So you can hop over to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a more general overview of the University of Minnesota's Climate Adaptation Partnership. We're a little bit newer. We have a long history, but are a little bit newer in some of this space. So a bit of background. Minnesotans are both concerned about the impacts of climate change in our state and throughout the region, and are also making significant impacts to address those concerns. So you can see here a study we conducted with the University of Minnesota this past year. We learned that 76% of Minnesotans are concerned about climate change, with the majority supporting both mitigation as well as adaptation to the impacts that we're already seeing in our region. And a vast majority of Minnesotans are also seeing local, state, and municipal governments as key players in addressing climate change in the state. Next slide, please. So MCAP was formed in 2008, actually by a small group of leaders from the University of Minnesota, local, state, and federal government partners, as well as private companies who started meeting to support increased awareness of investments in climate adaptation, specifically in Minnesota and across the Midwest. MCAP was organized, we've organized annual conferences over the years. We host climate adaptation awards to champion our leaders in the state. And we've engaged thousands of researchers, practitioners, and elected officials over the years in dialogue about climate impacts and adaptation. And now, with support from the University of Minnesota, as well as the state of Minnesota, we're expanding our vision and portfolio of work to develop a robust program that will help communities and landscapes prepare and thrive in our changing climate. So we have 3 tiers of the program. We've got our leadership program and support structure. We have sort of the research arm of the program with our applied climate researchers and technical assistance piece, as well as the climate resilience extension educators through the University of Minnesota Extension. Next slide. So our climate resilience extension educators are located across the state and focus on issues most salient to the communities in their region. For instance, we have extension educators focused on agriculture and water resources based in the Farmington Regional Extension Office, a forestry-focused extension educator based in Andover, just north of the Twin Cities, and we're collaborating with the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, who Jenna mentioned, to hire a climate and ag-focused extension educator that will be working specifically with tribes and based in our Cloquet Regional Extension Office outside of Duluth. Next slide, please. So our model of climate services through extension is really about adding capacity and expertise by placing climate-focused extension positions across Minnesota. This allows us to leverage the existing statewide extension infrastructure and trusted relationships that have been built through extension for decades. And it supports our applied climate research team, allowing us to improve our understanding of climate-related risks in the state and iteratively integrating that research and knowledge into our extension programming by bringing research to practice. The MCAP team is also able to accelerate the timeline between planning and implementation by providing needed support to make it easier for communities to apply for funding and make historic investments in climate smart practices for a wide range of adaptation strategies. Next slide, please. So this slide captures a number of the projects that we're working on. We are developing high-resolution climate projections for the state of Minnesota, developing climate resilience metrics alongside the state of Minnesota for the new climate action framework. And we're also developing a community climate leaders extension program to support individual citizen efforts to take action. And in the next few slides, I'll share examples of some of those projects to give you a better sense of the type of work that we do and the services that we provide. So the Minnesota, excuse me, you can go ahead on to the next slide, Jim. The agricultural weather study, which was funded in 2021 by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, includes the development of 3-mile resolution climate projections for the state of Minnesota using the CMIP-6 climate models, interpretation of those data into meaningful climate variables such as lake temperature, snow depth, and soil temperature and moisture, as well as the integration of the data into a publicly available online interactive tool, and the creation of sector-specific trainings and resources necessary to support the use of the projections in planning and decision-making. Next slide, please. And so this is just a quick snapshot of our Minnesota climate tool, climate being short for climate mapping and analysis. And this is just hot off the presses. We actually held a workshop last week at the Midwest Regional Climate Conference introducing these data, and we'll be developing the trainings that I mentioned in the last slide. So next slide, please, Jim. And the final project I'll highlight is one you'll learn more about from our partner, Ariane Laxo, who's going to be presenting in the next section. She is the Sustainability Director for HGA, which is an architecture and engineering firm based in Minneapolis. Earlier this year, we released a white paper written in collaboration with HGA, which characterizes the climate projection data needs of architecture and engineering professionals in the U.S., the challenges they encounter in accessing, understanding, and applying those data, and the opportunities to advance climate resilient services and expertise for this sector. We're now working with HGA as well as the University of Minnesota's Center for Sustainable Building Research to develop and test methodologies for doing this work, including the creation of data necessary to integrate into existing methodologies used by A&E professionals with the climate projections that we've developed. And you'll hear more from Ariane next. So I think with that is all I had. I wanted to run through things quickly so that we can move into more of our discussion portion of the session. And I see a few questions coming in through the chat. So Jenna, I don't know if we want to pause and answer a couple of those, or if we want to head over to our reflection activity right away.
I think we could pause and maybe do a couple of questions in the chat. I see a couple for me already, so I'm happy to take a swing at those. There's a question about the tools that I mentioned and if they can be used in other regions. That's a great question, and it really depends on the tool. The CHAMP tool for hazard mitigation plans right now is available for the Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, and Carolinas regions, but we are exploring ways to make that data available nationally. And Pivot, the tool that is looking at climate migration scenarios, it's really in its pilot stage right now. It's only available for parts of the Great Lakes region. We're piloting it with one community this year. We're looking for 5 communities to implement it with us next year. And then if those engagements goes well, and it seems like something that is worthwhile, we will be exploring ways to bring it to more communities in other regions. If you have particular questions about individual tools, I'd be happy to answer those offline. I see there's a question about how GLESA has partnered with the private sector, and you're very lucky because a great example of a collaboration will be talked about in the next hour. We've also worked with the private sector to do scenario planning, and some companies have applied for and won some of our small grants. In terms of contracting, it can look a lot of different ways. There's some work that we can do with partners with our existing capacity. We don't need kind of separate funding. We can apply for proposals together, and we do that a lot. If there's a funding opportunity where private sector applicants are eligible, we can apply together as a team. And sometimes companies have had funding already, and they can contract to GLESA at the University of Michigan to do some specific work.
Great. Do you guys have some other questions you want to answer, Amanda?
I see one that just came in from Rachel. For MCAP, are there any preliminary takeaways you can speak on for how design firms such as HBA have been in response to incorporate? I might hold this one actually, because I think Ariane will address some of this in her presentation. So at this point, I think for the next couple of minutes, are we okay to... I know that we're a little bit behind our agenda, so do we want to open it up for our reflection questions.
Yes, and we've got a Jamboard to support that. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that.
So I'm going to
Liza is
stop
put
sharing the slides, and I'm going to try to pull up this Jamboard. So if you want to start, Amanda and Jenna, with starting that conversation, go right ahead.
Sure. So we have two sort of discussion questions that we wanted to propose to the group, and we can use the Jamboard to respond to those, and then generate some discussion here as a full group for the next few minutes before our breaks. So the first question is, what climate-related decisions and/or planning processes are your clients and partners working on? So we really want to know where you guys might already be using climate data and information, or where you might be hoping to use that in the future. And then the next slide, if you are in the Jamboard and you slide over to number 2, that question is, what sources are you using for climate information? So we'll pause here for just a second and let folks begin to populate this.
Yeah, so just let us know if you have any issues about using Jamboard. I think you've used it extensively already in the previous 2 sessions, but if you're having trouble, please do that. Just let us know if you need some help. But why don't we take a few minutes and go ahead and start populating these on the 2 screens that Amanda talked about, and we'll use those for a facilitated group discussion here in just a couple minutes. So just spend a little bit of time, and then we'll kind of open it up for a discussion. Well, it looks like everybody's going to town here, so this is great. Does anybody kind of want to start about what they've put on here? You don't need to raise your hand, just kind of shout it out, and we can start a discussion, either on this slide or on the next one. Well, I'm just going to call out a few of these because I noticed that several of them deal with hazards and about linking some of this climate information into the hazard space. I see floodplain ordinances, mitigating riverine flood risk. There's, I think, one here on some wildfire. But I also notice there's also one here related to scenario planning. Anybody want to talk about any of those and how they might fit with some of the scenario planning that Jenna had talked about as well too? So I'm supposed to be facilitating a group discussion. I'm not supposed to be discussing. So please, somebody jump in. Help me out here.
Jim, I can jump in. Brian Smoliak from 2 Degrees Adapt. I'm curious if other people in the room, like when I think of scenario planning, we talk to clients about climate scenarios. We also find that clients are really interested in like specific scenarios, like there's a riverine flood plus like cascading hazards, basically like naming two or more specific hazards that occur at the same time or within the same time frame, and try to understand how that will impact things. So I think like when we talk about scenarios, it's very different. And then another prompt just for everyone to think about is we've found that there's a big shift in climate scenarios away from like the high end scenarios like RCP 8.5 or SSP 8.5 towards some of the mid-range scenarios that are more consistent with current like development trends and energy commitments by the international community. So I'm curious how other people are working with clients on that.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really glad you brought that up. I know when you say scenario planning, like even scenario planning itself can mean a lot of different things in different contexts. And the word scenarios, you're right, in the climate space even means a lot of different things. I think for GLISA's scenario planning approach, the goal is really to use a quantitative information in a qualitative way. So we're not picking one possible future. We're not picking an emission scenario. We're customizing kind of more climate impact scenarios. So I think what you described, where you're going to have problems if this weather event happens, and then you have this like kind of cascading compound flooding event at the same time, and that brings up a suite of kind of management decisions and challenges. So we will develop climate impact scenarios, might be a better way to describe what you just said, based on specific problems we know groups are facing. I mean, depending on the decision context, that may not be a helpful approach. Like if what you really need is you're looking for kind of to pick an emissions trajectory and then get customized projections for that, that's something that we can do too.
Just as a brief answer too, we certainly worked with the states in the Northeast, and they actually did some very detailed land use change modeling and then combined climate with it as well too. We didn't do that modeling. We just helped them facilitate the discussion with their community off of that. So I think there's a variety of different roles. Just in the sake of time, I've pulled up the second screen about what sources are you using for climate information. And looking at a lot of reference to some national tools as well as some of these local tools as well too. So anybody want to comment on some things that they're seeing on this screen?
Looks like folks will be excited for the NCA to come out.
Well, I'm really excited about the GLISA tool, about how you guys have taken some of the stuff that we just created, some national things through Climate Explorer, how you're now creating those local reports that actually go into what emergency managers need. That is such a critical thing for an end user to have. So congrats on that one.
And all those tools, and Amanda was involved in developing CHAMP. All those tools are based on existing information, right? It's a lot of what I'm seeing here on this slide. It's information that's already publicly available from agencies. It might just not be accessible in a way, that is relevant for folks' day-to-day work. So also you can just look at the slide and see there are so many sources of climate information. So I think what Amanda's team and mine can help you do is figure out what the best source of information could be for your particular project or decision context, to kind of help you navigate that space towards, oh my goodness, there's 10 climate portals, kind of where do I start? We can help with that.
Yeah, and also thinking about that translation piece as well. I mean, we'll hear Ariane talk about it a little bit more, but this TMY weather station data is what architects and engineers use, the typical meteorological year, and how, best practices for their sector and how to integrate the future climate projections into those same file formats is another piece that we're working on.
Yeah, so we're about ready to go to break, but I'm going to reiterate something that Jenna said. You do have the opportunity to sign up for some one-on-one time with both GLISA and MCAP, is that right? And so please take advantage of that because one thing that I have found is just the knowledge that these groups have of, well, have you looked at this? Have you tried that? If you combine these two pieces for what you're looking at, and just the depth of experience of the years that they've had working with end customers is incredibly important for just being able to provide a lot of resources. So that's one great thing about the Academy, is taking advantage of setting that up as well too. So we never have enough time in these sessions, but it is 1:50. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Please don't log off. If you'd like to, you can just turn your camera off, but we're going to get started right at 2 o'clock. So thank you for being here and look forward to seeing you in 10 minutes. Well, welcome back from the break. Just as a courtesy, if you could turn your cameras back on, just so we know that you're here, and I see the cameras turning on. Thank you very much. One thing that, really stood out to me from some of the presentations and discussion is the real importance of not only talking about data and information, but then the key services that are provided so that the end user can really understand what's going on and why it's important to them. And so to really accentuate that point, Jenna and Amanda are going to introduce their case study presenters. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. I will go ahead and go first. I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague Teal Harrison with Adaptation International. I've worked with Teal now for, 3 or 4 years, Teal. And I mean, she will say it much better than I will, but we work together to bring a stormwater vulnerability assessment tool and engagement approach from the Great Lakes to the U.S. Gulf region. And Teal and her colleagues' work at Adaptation International were really instrumental in helping us figure out how to do this on the ground, how to translate climate information in a way that's useful to practitioners working on flooding at the city level. And I'm really pleased that Teal can be here with us today. So I will pass it over to Teal.
Oh, thank you, Jenna. And it's always great to see your face. Hi, everyone. Like Jenna said, my name is Teal Harrison, and I'm a climate resilience specialist with Adaptation International. And I really am excited to present Floodwise Communities as an example of how private sector orgs and federal orgs can partner together and address climate-driven problems at the local level. Next slide. So, the Floodwise Communities Project is a project that we've been working on, like Jenna said, for 3 years and actually extends beyond that. But it's a process that guides practitioners through municipal stormwater vulnerability assessments using a web-based tool, and has a 5-step process, and it's all informed by best available climate data and social vulnerability data. And for this project, we focus on vulnerability assessments because, in order to have any kind of successful climate resilience plans and eventual actions, it really does need to have the foundation of your exposure, your sensitivity, and adaptive capacity to both present and future conditions. Next slide. All right. So this is just a snapshot of the web-based tool. As I mentioned, we look at the key components of vulnerability. Some additional highlights: the Floodwise Communities tool and process is qualitative and it's holistic, really making sure we're getting at the intersections, of not only just stormwater infrastructure, but critical services, people, neighborhoods, etc. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Sorry to rush you. Technology is technology. But so as I kind of alluded to, Floodwise Communities is a project that not only Jenna and I and the Floodwise team have been working on for 3 years, but it extends back all the way to 2017. It originated in the Great Lakes region, starting with 5 cities, then 12 cities that were working together basically on how to come up with a vulnerability assessment template or process that lower capacity communities can use and still get that foundation for climate adaptation planning and action. So I kind of came in phase 3 of the project, where it kind of shifted from the Great Lakes and to the Gulf Coast region and was scaled up to more than 50 cities, counties, and parishes that were using the tool to complete their assessments. Okay, next slide. All right. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the partnership. Like Floodwise Communities, it was a really big project. There were numerous partners across academic sectors, nonprofit sectors, and then of course the private sector, which I'm talking to you about today. And it was an ongoing process. It's an ongoing partnership, which is awesome. And I think it's really just underscored by close collaboration and really proactive collaboration across the duration of each phase of that project. And so as far as AI and GLISA's partnership, I think GLISA definitely was obviously serving in that climate service provider role and providing that climate science expertise. And AI was leading community engagement, as adaptation professionals in this project. Next slide. Actually, you can go 2 slides if you don't mind.
I'm sorry, did I go too far?
No, one more slide, please.
Okay.
All right, so in the slide, there's a few things represented. The first is going to be the figure on the left. This is actually something we used when we were trying to recruit communities to participate in the project, demonstrating kind of the inputs and the outputs of the project and the benefits therein. But of course, these were scaffolded by a bunch of work on the back end, and Lisa and AI worked really complementarily, if that's a word, on in these roles and in these contributions, ranging all the way from our subject matter expertise to developing strategies for outreach, engagement, and post engagement with communities and communications. So I'm going to be focusing on two of those inputs and how we work together, and that's going to be the best available data and professional support. Next slide. All right, so local weather and climate data is essential to the FloodWise assessment tool and process, and Lisa was foundational to that as the principal investigators and as federal climate service providers. I've listed some of these things here. One thing that I really love, though, about our partnership is that they were, active from beginning to end. Kim and Omar, climatologists with Lisa, were on all of our sub teams, facilitated workshops, helped put input in the tool. So it was just really great to be able to work with them on that. And one element that Lisa assisted with was our climate profiles for each of the communities, which is essentially a 4-page high resolution snapshot of climate conditions, both current and projected, in each of the 50 FloodWise communities that we worked with. So I'm just going to touch base about those. Next slide. All right. So one benefit of being able to work with Lisa and Skip and other CAPRISA on this resource is that, in this engagement with communities, in this assessment process, they're getting summaries of the best available data, and we can ensure that it's high quality and then also save them time on that. And the profiles were regionalized and, really try to balance both detailed communication of climate data, but also higher level communication for different audiences. And so, of course, this included temperature and rainfall, as you see here. Next slide. As well as flood risk and sea level rise, in the Gulf Coast region. And this data was used in the exposure analysis. And then it also, we found it to be kind of one of the inputs, in data profiles that had an immediate impact for practitioners and vulnerability assessment teams, in that they were able to take things like maybe the recent events that have happened or the projected rainfall to city council meetings for folks to consider, or using them in ongoing grant applications to bolster, the application for projects that they're working on or that they would like to work on. Okay, next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, we're talking about two inputs, the second of which is professional support. And so as climate resilience professionals, adaptation professionals, AI definitely worked in the community engagement role, and that did include a lot of trying to balance both the research priorities and just the real world context of working with medium-sized, small-sized communities on stormwater resilience, sometimes under-resourced communities in addition to that. So we really were trying to answer and address, how much we can alter or tailor, I should say, outreach engagement approaches for individual communities and even individual practitioners. And then, really thinking about how can we be responsive and when can we be responsive to participant needs and feedback, to our team throughout the duration of this phase of the project. All right, next slide. So I'm just providing a few examples of these. We had requests for specific outreach materials that, were in addition to what we've been providing, so someone can, show it to their higher ups, like this is what they want to see for them to give us the okay as much as I want to do the project. We also got feedback related to our vulnerability, our social vulnerability tool, Neighborhoods at Risk, which is really awesome. that it would be more readily usable for communities if we could provide shape files. And so that was something that Headwaters Economics, our partner, was able to do very quickly. And like I said, add that benefit to communities. We also worked with communities to come up with editable vulnerability reports that had executive summaries. So of course, if you were in the practitioner team, you know what's going on. But if you are a city council member or other reader, you don't maybe have that background. So we had executive summaries for each of them. And then, really importantly, we were very nuanced and respectful of the real world things going on, weather and climate events like Hurricane Ian, which affected a large amount of our participating communities. Next slide. All right. So there were several keys to our success, our partnership. And, I think the main one for sure is just the level and quality of interaction with Lisa, with the Lisa team as the project leads. And then within that, there was both structured project organization, but it was also flexible and dynamic across the board. And I really enjoyed having the knowledge exchange across all partners and different sub-teams within the project. It really just strengthened what we were able to provide to practitioners. And that also required things like foresight, having agency and trust for folks to go out and do work in their area of expertise, and then reflexivity along the way of how we're doing. Next slide. All right. And so out of Floodwise Communities Phase 3, there's been additional partnerships and collaborations. Of course, you've got publications, but it's also been a win for us in that we have been able to get connected with different communities of practice and engage in those conversations, exchange knowledge. And then, it resulted in actually new projects. For example, we were able to work with one community, Lafayette, Louisiana, taking their vulnerability assessment into an implementation project, looking at stormwater detention possibilities and designs that are multi-beneficial and equitable. And then, of course, Floodwise has been integrated into the GLESA Small Grants Program. So it's just another way that it's another iteration to both improve the tool and expand the tool to reach new cities and communities. So yeah. I have no idea if I'm over time, but I hope that this was informative for folks. And I really just want to thank you for your time and attention. Of course, I want to thank all of the Floodwise Communities project partners and our funders and endorsers. And I just want to thank the actual humans that were a part of this project. We have a few smiling faces here. We've got Kim, we've got Jenna, we've got Catherine, we got Bryce, and they just made my experience working on this project the last 3 years just really memorable. And so I really couldn't ask for just a better team here. So thank you.
That was excellent. I think we'll hold the questions until after the next speaker.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Teal. And now I want to introduce Ariane Laxo. She is the Director of Sustainability at HGA, advancing the firm's work on decarbonization, resilience, and fostering healthy communities. She's been exploring how climate projections can be used to inform architecture and engineering workflows for nearly a decade, including collaborating with climate scientists on how to translate outputs from climate projection models into data formats used by energy modeling tools. Ariane was lead author on Climate Forward and how architects and engineers are or aren't using climate projections to inform design, which details study findings from a research study HGA completed this past year with MCAP. So I will turn it over to Ariane to share more about that work.
Sorry, just had trouble with my button for a second there. Super excited to be here with you all. I'm also participating in the program the whole time, so I'm sure you'll see me more. So first of all, I am going to speak a bit about the Climate Forward report that Amanda mentioned that we published with MCAP earlier this year, because I think it really represents what's happening in the building industry when we talk about architecture and engineering. There's a lot that's happening in terms of using climate projection data to inform planning and inform nature-based solutions, and a lot of sea level rise work, and yet at the building scale, we're seeing some mixed results. So what this study looked at was we talked with folks through a survey and focus groups around the country, and had a couple of international participants as well, around what are they currently doing using climate projection data at all, or how are they using it, why are they using it, to inform the design process. And as we set the stage, one of the big takeaways here, that this slide is just, it's not meant to overwhelm with the complexity of the analysis tools that we use in architecture. And yet, as we've gotten more and more advanced with our ability to design for climate change mitigation, we rely on the software tools that help us do early analysis and modeling to understand what the best, most energy efficient carbon, low carbon solutions are. And all of them start with a weather file. And I don't think for a long time people were quite realizing how significant of a role that played in this process. So where does that weather file come from? Well, it depends on which discipline we're talking about. But a lot of the standards around how to use weather data were set a long time ago. And Amanda mentioned previously TMY3 files, which are used by architects and mechanical engineers in a lot of early analysis tools and the full-blown energy models. The data set goes from about 1990 to 2005. So even the weather we've seen since 2005 really means that we're using really outdated information. And is this a problem? That's what our industry is starting to grapple with and trying to really understand. We are saying that it is. So if you just look at this graphic, this is using California data, but still from available through CalAdapt, looking at the projections, multiple climate scenarios, looking at that historic weather data time frame of the TMY3 file versus the lifespan of an existing or a new building or an existing building that you're renovating. We can very clearly see that this is a gap and that there's likely some challenges. Another thing that we've revealed through this research is that our industry and the climate science industry use different vocabulary. So in our industry, people will talk about future weather files or future climate files, and they'll talk about historic climate files and weather files like interchangeably. Whereas the climatology industry, a climatology is a certain set of years of data, and there's a certain set of variables that are included in that. That is different than, we as architects and engineers haven't really been had to be educated around this, because we look at our standards and we look at the codified workflows that we all use that are, standard practice. And we sort of assume that all of that is baked in. And we're at a weird point right now where the codes and standards are not telling us what to do when it comes to climate projections. So our research methodology, and Amanda put the full report in the chat. I briefly mentioned we did a literature review, an online survey. We distributed it through professional associations and organizations like AIA, ASHRAE, USGBC. We did some focus groups with more of the advanced users that had responded to the survey as well. So what did we find? We have a few key findings here. First of all, we're seeing more sustainable design services in the industry in general, but that generally does not include climate projections. It's not including adaptation. So a lot of respondents said, we do sustainable design services. I was actually surprised that this wasn't 100%. A little disappointed that this wasn't 100%, because I would hope that at this point in our lives, the industry would change, but we can still do some work there. So we defined as part of this work the difference between sustainability services and climate services in the architecture and engineering industry for the built environment. And one of the biggest things that we talked about with people in the focus groups is any sustainability service that is doing analysis for the sake of carbon reduction, climate change mitigation could be using climate projection data. It just generally isn't yet. So this is an opportunity for our industry. So we also have heard several comments like this in our research, and we've experienced it ourselves. A lot of people are becoming more aware that we're using this historic data, this backward-looking data, but there's not like a consensus around the better answer. So some firms are using projections. So we extracted ourselves from this research. We are not represented, so I'll just give you some qualitative, what we're doing at HGA as we go through these results. But we saw in the responses from the survey, and we did, I will say, we anticipate that the people who answered the survey are at least thinking about climate projections in general. We probably didn't capture very many of the architects and engineers who were like, I don't even know what you mean by climate projection data. So we likely have a skewed sample anyway. But even with that skewed sample, less than half said that their organization is using climate projections, let alone themselves. And then this is their personal familiarity. So there were some that say they're using it, but a lot more who say, you know, I know that this is a thing, but I don't really know how to use it in practice. So we've got this gap between the industry we're talking about in ASAP and the architecture and engineering industry. And those that are using it are using all kinds of different information. So there are some great sources like what was presented today in the Midwest region, Resilient Massachusetts, CalAdapt, all of these came up. WeatherShift was a tool that that came up also, which is aiming to create a downscaled TMY-like format to be used in energy modeling. Whole sidebar we don't have time for on some of the challenges with the methodology, but it is something that's available. That did come up in our research. And a lot of folks said they're using this to have conversations with clients. They're using this data to at least have a high-level conversation about what these trends might mean. Very few people said that they're inputting this data into their energy models. So for example, how we're applying this on projects. This is a project that's been built for a couple of years. We did this, we looked at projection data for this about 6 years ago. We designed this project in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota. It was aiming for net zero energy. And so we wanted to have high confidence that if we're modeling it to be net zero and we're designing a certain amount of solar panels, that it will stay net zero even as the temperatures start changing and shifting. And so we designed really a very passive strategies heavy design and you know, good envelope. And then we tested in our energy modeling, we tested using weather files from WeatherShift. So these are manipulated, statistically downscaled climate projection files. There's some challenges with the methodology, as I alluded to. We have more in our paper, but it's better than nothing, and it's better than historic, which we know is wrong. So we grabbed a couple of files, we looked at this full range, and then we ran a couple of them through our energy model in addition to the historic file that we got from the neighboring airport. And what we actually found in the modeling was that the passive strategies not only will perform well over time, but we also saw that because of the changing climate in Minnesota, the passive strategies were going to really improve performance in terms of reducing energy use over time, because as the temperature was warming in the summer, the passive cooling could work really effectively, and there was less heating hours of the year in this project. So we felt confident that the design was going to perform over time, and in the several years they've been open, that's we've already had very extremely warm years, and they're playing that out. So there are a lot of barriers to using climate projection data. There's a lot of reasons why people don't use it. A few of them that we're highlighting here, clients aren't asking for it. We're an industry that relies a lot on standard practice and standard of care. These are legal definitions of what we should be providing our clients. And a lot of people pointed to the liability issues or said, our clients aren't asking us to do something different, and it's not codified. Nobody's telling us how to do this. So what is needed in order to overcome those barriers? Codes, standards, trainings, guides. People want training from their peers, not just from climate scientists. And so one of the ways that we've continued to work on how do we help fill some of these gaps is a continued relationship, as Amanda also mentioned, between MCAP, HGA, and we're bringing in the Center for Sustainable Building Research at the University of Minnesota. We have been doing a series of scenario planning trainings, charrettes at conferences at targeting architects and engineers, using very similar methodology of what we just saw from GLISA. But what we're aiming to show here is that even if you have all these challenges with like the perfect data and you might not be able to put the perfect file into your energy model, you can make decisions with the data that is available. There's a lot of information online on climate projections, and so we're just trying to help coach architects and engineers through, given the forecasted hazards, what are some understandings of risk we can learn, and then what are some design decisions we can explore. So with that, I'm at my time, and just the link is in the chat. Also, feel free to reach out or put any questions in, and we can chat.
Thank you, Ariane. And then I believe we have a few minutes for questions for our partners here. I see a couple that have come through in the chat, so I'm going to scroll back up, but if other folks have things, please feel free to raise your hand or chime in. Hannah asks for you, Teal, if there is a link to the social vulnerability tool. I don't see that has. Oh,
I
no,
did.
Jenna, you did put that in there. I'm sorry. Hannah also asked, how do you define equitable outcomes for the purposes of the project? And this question was to Teal.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question for me?
How do you define equitable outcomes for the purposes of your project?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's something that we have discussed a lot, both throughout the project and kind of in the and I guess you should say the data analysis phase. And so I do think that equitable outcomes, a big aspect of the training was social vulnerability, was equity, looking at those interactions. And for some of our participants, it really was either kind of the first step, or maybe they just had been thinking about equity as like some requirement and it was a burden. But I think we really did open up eyes, and at a more or less tangible local level, highlighted some of the inequities, but the ways that they can be addressed through how they manage their stormwater and how they plan to adapt their stormwater systems. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the main area. And then of course, those outcomes like at the individual community level will be seen, hopefully, in the future. And then as I mentioned, I was able to work with Lafayette, Louisiana, from taking that assessment, those areas that were definitely underserved in terms of stormwater services, and then working to identify potential detention sites, narrow those down, and then actually design those sites, and then begin a community engagement process, on those projects.
Thank you. Next question is for you, Ariane. Brian says, we're seeing similar pushback from clients around liability for metrics that address outdoor workers and occupants. How does HGA, or does HGA work on outdoor landscapes around buildings as well?
Yeah, we do have a civil and landscape team. So we work on, the whole built environment, the building and out, and some landscape only projects. So whenever we've talked with our in-house legal about the liability questions, our general agreement has been, it's our responsibility as an architecture and engineering firm and landscape firm to bring the information that is available about the changing climate to our clients, and then discuss what this might mean for their decision making. We can't say this future may happen over this future, but what we do know is that the past is not going to happen. So that's part of where we start those conversations. And then we essentially just advise our owners, here are the potential impacts. We talk and we try to facilitate that with them, discussing the potential impacts of those hazards, how we might design in ways to mitigate them. And heat stroke and death from, heat events is really a concern for many of our clients. But as is always the case when it comes down to dollars, that sometimes can be challenging. So we consider it our responsibility to have the conversation, and then the decision about what to do really rests on our owners. Until we see more standards and code bodies saying this is what you must do in response to those climate projections, that's kind of the best that we feel like we can do. And we do, I just realized I don't think I fully addressed the question that was a little bit earlier from Rachel, and I just want to speak to that briefly. Rachel, you were asking about, if it's not required in the standards, it can be difficult to convince a project owner to pay more. So yes, the uncertainty is absolutely a part of the conversation. What we're finding more success in is having conversations about what design decisions are we making right now that will last for 100 years, like your structure, some things in your site, stormwater, often, many of those are many decades. And then some decisions that only, your system might last for 20 or 30 years. Then the conversation there is what might it look like in 20 or 30 years when I'm upgrading this MEP system or something like that. You can see my cat has joined me in this call. So some of those discussions are not just around pay more now, but they're about what can we put in place now so that it's easier to make those different decisions later.
There's a couple more questions in here, but for the sake of time, I do want to ask both Teal and Ariana to kind of answer one key question. Is, how did working with GLISA MCAP help you do work you really couldn't otherwise have done? And I think this came through in your presentations, but I mean, if you could just give a very short answer to that for the rest of the participants in this workshop.
Sure. So I think for us, it really was just being able to streamline, securing the best available climate data and communicating that to a wide reach of communities. I mean, 50 communities is a lot of communities, and GLISA really helped not only with providing them tailored resources, but also, helping us put together a team to really, put together really great engagements with each of them. And then, we had actionable assessments, being able to integrate that climate data, but also, as I mentioned, there's that immediate impact that we saw with several communities that their local weather and climate profiles allowed to happen. So, without them, we wouldn't have those and we wouldn't have had those outcomes.
And so as Amanda mentioned in my intro, I've been talking with climate scientists around the world, Minnesota, different states for, we'd even had a shared research study with the MPCA 5 years ago where we talked to climatologists from every state. This has been the first relationship with a climate science organization where they've been like, oh, you're an end user that's not being addressed by our industry. How can we help? Let's find a shared vocabulary. Let's work together. And so it's been very exciting to start this shared research. And then, a year from now, we're hoping we'll be sharing at, this forum, the next iteration of it, a methodology that we are developing right now that we can use in Minnesota with the data that MCAP is creating, that hopefully can provide a precedent for some of these, associations and standard organizations. So just the open arms of a climate provider boundary organization to say, let's work together. We believe in this industry has been really exciting because it certainly took some time to find that right partner.
Wow. Great presentations, both of you, great case studies. I'm certainly going to dig into all the resources that both of you presented. Just great work and great partnerships with both GLISA and MCAP. So excellent examples of that. So unfortunately, as these things go, we continue to run short of time. So we do want, though, an opportunity for everybody here to really have a discussion off of this. Now, we're going to go back and use that same Jamboard again. Hopefully you didn't close it, but if you did, Eliza is going to go ahead and rechat that one out as well, too. Also, please put any other questions into chat that come up. We will get those connected to the right people and get those answers out to you. So a lot of great discussion sitting through here. What we want to do is get to know one another better. And you'll see as we go into these breakout rooms that there'll be groups of 3, but we're going to be using the same Jamboard. So we're going to be able to see kind of what other groups are doing as well, too. But let's go ahead and get ready to go out to these breakout rooms and think about these different questions. They're on 4 separate slides. And so hopefully you'll be able to just kind of manage your time and start putting your energy into some of these that you want to talk about. So we ready to go to the breakout rooms again? Of course, you couldn't hear that because I forgot that as we came from breakout rooms back to the main room, we're all muted. So can everybody see my screen now again?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let me see if I can advance the slide. Great. Okay, well, believe it or not, we are in the last 10 minutes of this. But what I'd like to do is really go back to this just exercise we went through. Does anybody want to talk about something that really stood out to them in your discussion in small groups on some of these questions? Was there more energy around one, or just some sort of reflection? And just go ahead and jump in and say something. I know we're all being super polite, but somebody surely has a reflection on what went well.
Well, Jim, I think that they're, oh, nope, sorry, go ahead, someone else.
We all at the same time. I think it was a great opportunity to meet people. This is a little bit higher level, but I think it was really a great opportunity for people to meet and connect, encourage people to reach out on LinkedIn, encourage people to learn a little bit more about what other people's work is. And secondly, I think the information that was shared, all of the speakers were just fabulous. And it's just so exciting to see that we can work with you and learn more about your tools and engage. And so those are my thoughts and comments.
Thanks, Amy. Who else?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I must admit that even though the discussions that we have through the speakers and so on, they're, very educational and interesting, but for those of us who are fairly new to the topic, it could be a little uphill, or it could take some time to properly understand and process data and the approaches that we have to the topic. But when we do break out in smaller sessions, one way or another, we end up learning a little bit more about either the main topic or what other people do, which is always fun to me. So it's been sort of the highlights for me in this whole process, just getting to engage with people and have them help me better understand a little bit about this bigger picture. So yeah, appreciate that. And thank you all for facilitating this.
Any other basic comments before we start wrapping up today?
I'll jump in and just say that data has been very sort of challenging in my past work because a lot of times, sometimes not even existing current impacts that are affecting a community are captured in the projection. So, and then the lived experience of the community isn't being ground truth or incorporated. It seems like not enough collaborators are at the table to make sure the data is really relevant and actionable and serves the community that is going to be either impacted or, receive adaptations. So that was one of the things that I was posting on, and it was a really rich conversation. There's so many dimensions to data and whether the data is reflective of reality or various kinds of political or professional constraints.
All great comments. I think, that as the years have gone by and we've held this Climate Academy, so Jenna, this is the third one of these, I believe. But this conversation has grown richer and deeper, and a lot of people keep doing work, but there's a couple of constant themes that, number one, there's not enough of us doing this work. But on the other side, there's not great ways for us to connect to one another to figure out exactly how to get paid to do this work and do that effectively in partnerships as well too. But through these sorts of networks that we form, and just like some of the comments, there are better ways to be able to start figuring those things out one-on-one. And it's the great partnership here between the CAPRISAs and ASAP that's really trying to address that. So it's just really exciting to see this group. And I just want to thank ASAP for asking me to MC this session, because I learned so much today. Jenna, Amanda, do you guys want to say anything about the signups that are available or any other ways that you can provide continuing support as we go through the academy?
I think all I'll add that if those one-on-one times don't work for you, I think I'm really willing to engage with you all kind of after the academy ends, or to connect with people on my team that could talk to you a bit more. So please don't hesitate to reach out kind of outside of those one-on-one opportunities too.
Great. Just as a reminder, you can sign up for those consultations. Amanda, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have something to add?
No, not at all. I'll just put email addresses in the chat.
Okay. Also, there is the Slack channel that is out there. I don't have that live right now, but for those of you that do like that, that's another way to be carrying on this conversation. I think all of these questions and notes coming out of Zoom are going to be captured and provided in the shared folders for you as well, too. Just for those of you that, are going to be attending some more of the regional talks, remember this Thursday is the California Nevada regional session that as well, too. And boy, if it's half as good as today has been, that's going to be a real treat as well, too. Thanks to everybody for all the hard work to get this all put together. Your teams, Jenna and Amanda, but obviously also the whole ASAP team went very smoothly. And thanks to all of you for all you do to help make our nation more resilient to these huge challenges we face. With that, is there anything else from ASAP that we would like to hit on before we close for the day?
No, but a huge thank you to Jim as well for emceeing and just guiding us through the session today. And thank you everyone for being here. It was a great session.
All right. Well, so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and to make new connections as well, too. If there's anything that people want to reach out directly to me, please do that as well, too. So thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.